Good afternoon. My name is Ricardo Mireles. I'm the chair of the Healthcare Committee with the CCBC. I'm pleased to be here opening the session today, and I would like to thank you all attendees for being here with us. We at the Chamber of Commerce Brasil-Canadá are always committed to strengthening the relationship between Canada and Brazil by bringing perspectives from both countries in the most relevant topics across multiple industries. As economies start to warm up and recover after or from the pandemic, Brazil again become an attractive market. This session will bring information to help Canadian companies navigate the Brazilian healthcare regulatory market and find opportunities to establish partnerships in Brazil. I'm pleased to welcome to this session good afternoon. My name is Ricardo Mireles. I'm the chair of the Healthcare Committee with the Chamber of Commerce Brasil-Canadá. I'm pleased to open the session, and I would like to thank all attendees to be here with us today. The Chamber of Commerce Brasil-Canadá is committed to strengthen the relationship between Canada and Brazil by bringing perspectives from both countries in most relevant topics across multiple industries. As the economies in general start to recover from the pandemic, Brazil again become an attractive market. This session will bring information to help Canadian companies navigate the Brazilian healthcare regulatory market and find opportunities to partner with Brazilian companies. I'm pleased to welcome to this session the representatives of Verano Advogados, which is a member of the Healthcare Committee and is in the forefront of helping Canadian and Brazilian companies to fulfill their international aspirations. Verano Advogados is one of the leading and most renowned Brazilian business full-service law firms with a diverse team of over 600 people, including 250 lawyers working in various areas of expertise. Veranos has a broad range of work and support clients with every need, from providing assistance in mergers and acquisitions, privatizations, and company formation, to represent clients in disputes, from offering advice on tax issues and also guiding companies to the challenges in highly regulated industries, among other things. Verano has local presence in Brazil in 4 major cities, Rio de Janeiro, São Paulo, Porto Alegre, and the capital, Brasilia, and represent clients in Brazil and internationally, with the support of a wide network of key partners and relationships around the world, including members of top legal organizations, such as Global Advertising Lawyers Alliance, Emerging Market Advisors, Luz Labores, and World Service Group. Today, we will hear Renata Fialho, Vanessa Felicio, and Beatriz Marconi, who are all part of the group dedicated to the life science and healthcare industry, discuss the healthcare opportunities in Brazil. And without further ado, I would like to pass to Renata Fialho, who will start the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Ricardo, for the introduction, for the CCBC, for the great organization of this important event, and also, and most importantly, to all the attendees for your interest in our panel. Today, we have a quite challenging agenda, even though the title of the panel is Healthcare and Opportunities in Brazil. We'll actually cover healthcare that's most related to services by institutional healthcare providers such as hospitals and clinics, but we will cover as well life sciences, which relates more to products such as pharmaceutical, medical devices, and other products subject to sanitary surveillance. I'm trying, okay. So here, as I told you, we have a very challenging agenda. So hopefully it will be useful to provide you with an overview of the healthcare system and market in Brazil. Some of the topics that we'll talk about today include an overview of the Brazilian healthcare system from like an institutional perspective, market numbers, so life sciences and healthcare markets, how they do look like actually, and what are the perspectives. As a third point, we'll talk about doing business in life sciences and health sectors in Brazil, so how to and important things you should consider. And finally, we'll talk about recent developments and trends in the life sciences and healthcare markets. Since many of you may not be totally familiar with the Brazilian healthcare system, as a warm-up, we would like to ask a question for you to answer, just for us to oops. I'm trying to launch the question here. I don't see the comment. Beatriz, do you think you could launch the third question, please? Yes. So the question we would like to ask as a warm-up is, who do you believe has access to the Brazilian healthcare system? So just please vote. One more second, 2 seconds for you to vote. Okay, I will end now the poll. Okay, so we have the same percentage of people voting for the second and the third question. And actually, the third question is the third answer is the correct one. All individuals, in respect of citizenship and domicile, have access to the Brazilian healthcare system. Since 1988, with the Brazilian Constitution, health is a fundamental social right of every person and a duty of the state. All individuals, with no distinction whatsoever, shall have free and universal access to healthcare. That means it's an individual right of individuals to demand free access to health services, and it's an obligation of the state to provide it. This principle of Brazilian law has led in the past years to what we call the judicialization of health. What does that mean? That individuals, they have filed individual claims before courts of law, demanding access to services and products that are not provided for in the public health system. Of course, as you can imagine, this has led to several budgetary issues concerning the handling of healthcare in Brazil. This next slide provides you with, yeah, I don't know what, I cannot, yes, thank you. This slide provides you with an overview of the structure of the Brazilian healthcare system. As you see on the top, there is the Ministry of Health. The Ministry of Health is the highest sanitary authority in the country, responsible for ultimately resolving health issues in Brazil. The Ministry of Health counts within its structure with authorities, foundations, state-owned companies responsible at a federal level for public health actions and services. The most important entities attached to the Ministry of Health are CNS, which stands for the National Health Committee, the ANVISA, which is the National Health Surveillance Agency, and ANS, which is the National Supplementary Health Agency. The CNS is the highest decision-making authority of SUS, which is the public health system, and it's also responsible for managing and resolving healthcare policies in general. Anvisa is the agency responsible for coordinating the national health surveillance system, and it has a pretty broad scope of authority, from issuing general regulation to granting licensing, marketing authorizations, good manufacturing practice certificates, and marketing authorizations. The ANS is responsible for regulating and supervising the supplementary system. That means players in the market which operate health plans and insurance. The Constitution provides for a decentralization directive of the SUS. That means that in each level of the federal government, states, the federal district, the municipality, all have entities of their direct and indirect administration that are responsible for licensing, overseeing, and regulating health-related products and services. That's the reason why it's very important for you to review legislation at a local level anytime you want to operate a business in Brazil. Health actions and plans, they have a public character under the federal constitution, and the state provides it directly through public hospitals, or indirectly via public contracts with private hospitals. Of course, the private enterprise is free to operate in the healthcare market as well, and it does so through what we call a complementary system, when it complements the activities of the SUS, the public health system, through public contracts, or what we call in a supplementary basis, when it does it with outside of the SUS. Now that we've had a glimpse on how the system is structured, I'll pass to my colleague Vanessa, who will talk a little bit about the healthcare and life sciences market.
Hello, everyone. My name is Vanessa. I'm an associate of Beirano Advogados. I'm also part of the group dedicated to healthcare, and thank you for joining. So we are now going to provide you with an overview of the Brazilian healthcare market. According to the data that was provided by the Brazilian National Health Council, in January 2020, the total number of hospitals in Brazil was 6,642. Being 4,198 private hospitals and 2,444 public hospitals. Based on this information, can anyone guess the size of the Brazilian healthcare market in 2020? I'm going to launch here a poll. So can you please vote on the option that you think is the correct one? Okay, I'm going to give you a few more seconds. So I'm going to enter the poll. I can see that most of you voted in option C, 222 billion. And it is actually the correct one. You can see that it is a very large market in Brazil, and because of that, foreign investors are paying close attention to it. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yes, thank you. So with respect to category segmentation, the inpatient care segment represented 42.5% of the sector's overall value. It's worth mentioning that the lack of hospital beds and amenities in both private and public hospitals created a demand for new healthcare providers. In this specific segment, buyers that of course can afford private hospitals, they tend to be less price sensitive and more quality oriented. The medical goods segment represented 29% of the sector's aggregate value, this green area over there. With respect to market distribution, private providers represented 66.4% of the total sector's value. They are more influential and they absorb a higher share of the total healthcare expenditure than public providers. And this despite the existence of the universal healthcare that Renata just mentioned. That can be explained because of the long waiting list, limited coverage, and also lower quality of services. Now we can go to the next slide. Since 2015, there's been a consolidation of private providers. This market is still highly diverse, fragmented, and regionally focused, despite this consolidation that has been happening for a while. And because of that, there are several opportunities for consolidation, especially across region. Large hospitals in Brazil, they face intense competition, and there are also certain entry barriers. For instance, we have strict regulations, we need to have large capital requirements, up-to-date equipment, and also skilled staff. Despite the existence of these intense competitions and the entry barriers, this segment is still very attractive for investors because of mainly two reasons. The first one is the significant growth of expenditure in recent years, which helped ease competition among hospitals, and also the fact that Brazil has the second largest healthcare expenditures in the continent, which encouraged new players. To put this into perspective, Canada has the third largest healthcare expenditures in the continent. As you may know, buyers of the Brazilian healthcare market, they may vary in size, from individual patients to large health insurance companies. According to the information from the Brazilian Insurance National Agency, the ANS, I think that we can go to the next slide. Yeah. Thank you. So according to the information from the ANS, in June 2021, the rate of the Brazilian population that was covered by private insurance was 24.87%. This means that almost 1/4 of the Brazilian population uses private healthcare services, either relying on individual health insurance plans or corporate plans. It is also worth pointing out that approximately 80% of the insurance Brazilians are insured by just 20% of health insurance companies. This means that there's a high concentration of covered individuals by large operators. We have been seeing a growth of private medical insurance, and we believe that there's still room for expansion in this specific industry. Because people, they are interested in paying for private insurance plans that grant them access to better treatment. We are now going to switch to the healthcare market, from the healthcare market to pharma market. And I'm going to launch a new poll here. Just a second. So the Brazilian pharmaceutical market is the largest in Latin America. And based on this information, can anyone guess the size of the pharmaceutical market in 2020? Let's see. I'm going to give you a few more seconds. So I can see that most of you voted in option C, which is 25 billion. But as a matter of fact, it is 18 billion. So in 2020, the pharmaceutical sales in Brazil reached 18 billion, and in 2021, it is expected to reach 19.3 billion. We expect to see this rapid growth in the market in the next few years. Consider the continued growth of an aging population. Elderly people have more medical checkups, more chronic disease. Another factor to consider is the ascension of the middle class and also the rise of the healthcare as a national priority. Although there are several positive things about the pharma industry in Brazil, one should bear in mind when deciding to invest in Brazil that the pharma segment has certain complexity. For instance, we have restrictive pricing policies. We'll discuss about this topic later on in this presentation. We have a strong local industry, and we have a complex fiscal regulatory frameworks. Next, we selected a few tables that we believe that have valuable information about the pharma market. This first table evidences that in the past few years, local pharma companies have increased their market share. The Brazilian generic law that has over 20 years changed the landscape. It enabled the growth of local drug companies, which in the beginning they were focused on manufacturing generic drugs, but now they are investing in innovation. The next table, yes. So the next table shows that the pharma market is still a highly fragmented market, and there are key players, both from local and foreign companies. So I think that we can go to the next one.
Hello, I'm sorry, I have some troubles with the presentation. I will start to present again, sorry. Well, I think you are seeing my screen. Now, in my part of the presentation, I will provide information about the regulatory license necessary for the operation of healthcare and life science companies. Note that I will only provide information about regulatory license and not about general license required for business entities, because our intention is providing information about the particularities of the health sector. So the first license required for the operation of a life science company is the operating authorization, which is an authorization issued by Anvisa in accordance with the activities performed by the company and the products that the company deals with. For example, if a company intends to import and distribute a medical device in Brazil, this company will need to obtain AFI, which is the operating authorization for medical devices contemplating the activities of importation and distribution. The second license necessary to operate is the operating license, which is issued by the municipal health authority, for example, the health authority from the city of São Paulo, in the same base that the operating authorization. That means that the license will be issued in accordance with the activities and the products that the company deals with. The third license required is the enrollment before the professional council and the appointment of a technical responsible. This technical responsible must be registered in the same professional council that the company, and he or she will undertake the responsibility of the company before the health authorities and the professional council. The last one is the Good Manufacturing Practice Certificate. This certificate is necessary when the company intends to hold the registration of drugs
or medical devices classified in risk class 3 or 4, the highest risk class of medical devices. And this document is issued by Anvisa, attesting that the manufacturing facilities are in compliance with the applicable legislation. It's important to mention that this certificate is necessary even if the manufacturing premises are located abroad. In this, I would like to also highlight that all products commercialized by a company must be duly registered, enrolled, or notified before Anvisa in accordance with the applicable legislation. And drugs, there are some drugs that are subject to approval of its price before CEMED, which is a department of Anvisa. And finally, it's important to say that only Brazilian incorporated entities are eligible to apply for the sanitary license. So foreign companies cannot apply for the license that I mentioned here. In the next, moving on, I would like to say about the license required for healthcare services. The licenses are quite similar. The healthcare services will need operating license and enrollment before the professional council, but these companies will also need to be registered before the National Health Facilities Register. This is a register maintained by the Ministry of Health for all health facilities. For example, hospitals must be registered before this registration, clinics, pharmacies, among others. And my part is this. Now I think it's Vanessa.
Hello again. So now that we have already covered the license requirements that apply to both institutional and individual healthcare providers, we'll discuss the alternatives that may be adopted by foreign investors, including Canadians that are willing to do business in Brazil in the healthcare sector. As foreign investors, they cannot hold the license applicable to legal entities nor apply for product registration, as Beatriz just mentioned. They may choose one of the following three alternatives. The first option is to incorporate a Brazilian subsidiary from scratch and to obtain this license in due course. The second option is to acquire a Brazilian company that already holds those licenses, and that might be a good fit for foreign investors who have plans to internationalize their activities in Brazil in a short period of time. The third option is to enter into a contractual arrangement with a local company that, of course, already holds those licenses. Such partnership may be in the form of a license agreement, a distribution agreement, a research collaboration agreement. There are different types of agreements that may be adopted by the parties. We'll then provide you with further details about each one of these options. So I think that we can go to the next one. Thank you. So the first option is to incorporate a Brazilian subsidiary. Although the Brazilian system allows a foreign company to operate in Brazil through a branch, in order to do so, it will have to obtain the authorization from the government, which can be a quite lengthy and bureaucratic procedure. And it doesn't bring any actual benefit for foreign investors, at least from a Brazilian perspective. And because of that, we usually recommend our clients to incorporate a company organizing in accordance with Brazilian laws, rather than opening a branch here. There are two corporate types that are often adopted in Brazil. The first one is the limited liability companies, the LLCs, and the next one is the corporations. We usually advise our clients to incorporate a LLC because it has a more flexible structure. In addition, whenever there is no minority shareholder and no joint venture partner involved who can have a conflicting interest, there's no compelling reason to incorporate a corporation. By using the limited liability form, you can also avoid certain formalities that are associated with operating a corporation. For instance, you do not need to maintain and keep corporate books. You do not need to observe certain disclosure formalities. for instance, publishing the financial statements, the corporate resolution, and things like that. And it's also worth mentioning that if you decide to incorporate a company as a limited liability company, it's also possible to transform it into a corporation at any time, and it's a quite simple and straightforward process. Limited liability companies, they may be incorporated by one or more quota holders, who may be either individuals or legal entities. Corporations, they must necessarily be incorporated by at least 2 shareholders, who can be either individuals or legal entities also. Both limited liability companies and corporations, they may be managed by one or more administrators. And there is no minimal capital requirements for both limited liability companies and corporations. Depending on the activities that are going to be carried out by the Brazilian subsidiary, it may take from 1 to several months to be fully operational. For instance, hospitals, clinics, pharma companies, they may take several months to be fully operational. Foreign investors, thank you. Foreign investors who are planning to incorporate a Brazilian subsidiary, the first thing that they'll have to do is to appoint a legal representative in Brazil. And we also need to obtain certain documents in order to incorporate the Brazilian subsidiary. One of them is the power of attorney that I just mentioned, appointing the local representative. The second one is the corporate certificate containing basic information about the foreign investor, and also the articles of incorporation about the foreign investor. Another thing that we think is worth entities is subject to registration with the Brazilian Central Bank. Without this registration, it is not possible to remit dividends and profits, and it's not possible to repatriate the capital initially invested. In a nutshell, incorporating a local legal entity is usually suggested by foreign investors who are willing to start a company from scratch, who do not intend to undertake any potential liability resulting from a pre-existing business, and also who have no time constraints. Now we can go to the next one. So the other option is to acquire equity participation in a Brazilian company that already holds the license required to operate in the health sector. This may be more beneficial to the extent that immediately following the closing of the transaction, the foreign investor will be able to carry out its activities and to promote its interests via target company. It takes approximately a few months in order to complete an M&A transaction. As a general rule, an M&A transaction will comprise the following steps. The first step is to execute a non-disclosure agreement. Then you have to assemble the deal team. And then you conduct a limited due diligence. Based on the results of this limited due diligence, you prepare a non-binding offer, a term sheet or an MOU containing the basic terms and conditions of about the M&A transaction. Then you will conduct a full due diligence. And in parallel with this due diligence, you start drafting and negotiating the transaction documents, which will of course reflect the results of the due diligence. If there is any condition present, you will only close the M&A transaction following the completion of the condition present. The usual points of concern in due diligence exercise are the following. From a tax perspective, we usually analyze the tax claims and tax benefits. From a civil perspective, we'll verify if there is any dispute that may prevent the deal from happening, or if there is any litigation that may create any reputational damage. With respect to labor matters, we will also analyze the commercial representative agreements, because those agreements, they are governed by a specific law here in Brazil. We'll also take a look at the collective bargaining agreement. With respect to the contracts review, we'll determine if there are change of control provisions, termination rights, restrictions to competition, and things like that. And from a regulatory standpoint, we will verify the sanitary license, the product registrations, and if there are lawsuits involving regulatory aspects. So those are the main things, the main points of concerns when conducting a due diligence. And depending on the results of the due diligence, the foreign investor may determine that a given business unit or an asset should not be part of the transaction. If that occurs prior to the closing of the transaction, the target will have to undergo a corporate reorganization in order to segregate the assets that are of no interest to the foreign investor. Okay.
Well, as you have seen from Vanessa's presentation, it can be a quite lengthy process to incorporate and have your company up and running in Brazil with all the licenses. It can be also challenging to find a target for acquisition that is suitable as a size in respect of facilities, and of course also with respect to price. And many companies, they are not really wishing to take the risk and invest in Brazil directly through the acquisition of a company, or having the time that it takes to incorporate a local subsidiary. That's the reason why many foreign companies, they start doing business in Brazil through contractual arrangements with a Brazilian partner that owns already all the licenses that Beatriz talked about. Even though there are several types of agreements we usually see in this industry, such as research collaboration, co-promotion, license and supplies, and development agreements, the most usual type of agreement is a distribution agreement, whereby the owner of a foreign product contracts with the Brazilian party the distribution of the products in the Brazilian territory. And the reason why is, since only a local company can own the marketing authorizations before Anvisa, this will allow for the sale of the product in the Brazil through the distributor. And in the meanwhile, sometimes the foreign company, it starts incorporating its own company to sell it directly, but use the distribution agreement as in an interim period to start and kick off the activities here. So usually the most usual, Bia, can you please put the next one? Yes, so we are kind of running out of time here, and there are several parts that we still wish to cover and that are contained in some of the questions that the attendees have already submitted. I will just mention with respect to distribution agreements, the most important portion, as of course all the points that we have listed here, they're pretty important, but they are like very common in other types of transactions, such as exclusivity, non-compete, termination rights, and so on and so forth. But the most important portion here relates to the marketing authorization, because as we have mentioned here several times, only the Brazilian company can file for the marketing authorization with Anvisa. So usually these distribution contracts, they will have very detailed sections with terms and conditions relating to the quality of the dossier, responsibility for filing for marketing authorizations, and most importantly, what happens with this asset, which is the marketing authorization, when the contract is terminated. Shall the distributor return it to the product holder? Shall it transfer the marketing authorization to another distributor? So it's usually a very important portion of the agreements in this industry. In co-marketing and co-promotion agreements, several other questions that are more operational must be regulated, like who bears the costs for co-promotion and co-marketing, who shall make the training, who may interact with healthcare providers, And of course, since healthcare providers, they may be qualified as public agents, of course, compliance and anti-corruption clauses are very important in this kind of arrangements. Next one, please. Joint ventures, it's also a very usual structure for exploring the Brazilian market, in that it allows for a combination of the strength, the knowledge, and the capital of foreign investors with the local knowledge, cultural awareness, and presence in the market. The joint venture can be an incorporated in a joint venture whereby the parties, they form together a new company, or a non-incorporated joint venture. That means just a contract. Then the joint venture agreement will list all the rules, the rights, restrictions, and obligations of the parties with respect to this relationship in the joint venture agreement itself. Or if they decide to incorporate a company, usually this will be set forth in a shareholders agreement. There is no distinction between the foreign party and a domestic party in a joint venture in Brazil. Next one. Okay, so now let's move to another topic, which are the recent trends and developments in the market. As Vanessa mentioned in her presentation, there has been a consolidation in the market as of 2015. And why is that? The reason for this consolidation was the enactment of a law which authorized the participation of foreign capital in healthcare providers. Before that, there was a limitation, this was not possible. So since 2015, we have seen a huge increase in numbers of transactions in this area, both by service providers seeking organic growth, as well as by institutional investors that saw an opportunity in this market. And we believe that, as Vanessa mentioned in her speech, we still believe there is great room for transactions and for consolidation in this area, and it's still a very good market to tap into. Another trend that we have seen recently relates to the deshospitalization. The previous one, please. The deshospitalization. As Vanessa mentioned in her talk about the market, the Brazilian demographics is changing very rapidly, and the elderly is the fastest growing group. That means that this group boosts the need for appointments, therapies, exams, surgery, and this is a very, very challenging fact to the healthcare model in Brazil that's still extremely hospital-centered, and where the costs are usually much higher than in other simpler structures such as emergent care units and retail clinics, for instance. So also the fact that the public system is insufficient to allow to provide healthcare to everyone, and only 1/4 of the population has private insurance plans. This poses also challenges from financing perspective. So as a response, what we have seen as a trend in Brazil recently is a new wave of business models that aim, so to say, to bridge the gap between access and payment for health services. We have seen more recently an increase in a greater number of emergency care units, first aid units and clinics, and also of alternative form of financing, such as discount cards and self-care plans. Of course, there are several regulatory issues that still have to be overcome, but we do believe that alternatives to hospital will emerge in Brazil and will play a key role in the health system. And since this is also a new market, we see a lot of opportunity for investor in this area. Next one. Okay, so another hot topic is telemedicine. Until the COVID-19 pandemic, telemedicine in Brazil has had a very limited development, and because of regulatory restrictions. Just to have, for you to have an overview here, the first time the Federal Medical Council reviewed and opined on telemedicine was in 1997, when it answered a consultation by our public oil and gas company Petrobras about the treatment of employees in overseas platform. 5 years after that, it enacted this resolution 1643 that makes reference to the Tel Aviv Declaration, which is like the holy grail of telemedicine and the first international document, but actually it is very laconic in its allowed telemedicine in very, very limited situations, only in emergency situations and only for second opinion. In 2009, this position with respect to the limitations of remote care have been reinforced by the medical codes of ethics, which actually prevents the treatment of patients without the direct examination by the physician. So, of course, since 2009 and 2019, there has been several developments with respect to medtech and new technologies in general that applied also to healthcare. And the Federal Medical Council tried to issue, it actually enacted a new resolution by the end of 2018 that was published only in 2019. But this resolution, which allowed for a broader use of telemedicine as a remote care means, was revoked. It didn't even not come into force. It was revoked right after because of the commotion of the medical community and allegations that the resolution had not been discussed enough and that it did not address all concerns of physicians in general. Of course, everything changed in 2020 with the pandemic, and an emergency law authorized broad use of telemedicine as a general means for treatment in healthcare. And the issue is now that the market for telemedicine has grew exponentially in 1 year. There has been several investment in this area, but there is the question that relates to how the actual definitive resolution will look like. The emergency regulation is very specific in indicating that telemedicine as it is now in Brazil is only allowed as long as the COVID pandemic is in place, and that the Federal Medical Council will have to issue a definitive regulation in this regard. Of course, it's very hard to predict how this resolution will look like, but we are very confident that the offer of telemedicine services will never be limited to what it was before, and that it will be an important solution in Brazil. And it's also very relevant in view of the country's dimensions and the lack of physicians in several more remote parts. So we will have to see how this will look. We expect that this new resolution will be published in the upcoming months, and we hope that it will it reflects the good use and the services that telemedicine has rendered during the pandemic. So, Beatriz, your turn.
Other important trend in the health market is the development of health technology that drives the creation of new products that often are not categorized by Anvisa. An example is the development of software that are classified as medical device. This type of product is not regulated by Anvisa, and for this reason, is regulated by the general rule that applies for medical device. But this lack of specific regulation causes several problems, because sometimes the companies cannot meet the specific requirements necessary for the registration of the product, because the regulation was created thinking about physical product, and you have a digital product. But considering this scenario, Anvisa is preparing a specific regulation for this matter. Another trend in the sector is the cannabis products. Cannabis products were regulated by Anvisa in 2019 and authorized the prescription and use of medicinal cannabis. The regulation issued by Anvisa defines the procedure for granting sanitary authorization for manufacturing and importing cannabis, and also establish requirements for its commercialization, prescription, dispensation, monitoring, and supervision. The rule determines that cannabis products must have mainly CBD and must observe a limit of 0.2% of THC, which can be exceeded in some specific situations, such as when the patient has no other therapeutic alternative. In addition, this regulation also provides for rules on labeling and quality control of these products, among other topics. But last important aspect is that the cultivation of cannabis remains forbidden. There is a bill under discussion that would aim to allow the cultivation of cannabis. However, this bill did not become a law yet, and the active ingredient shall be imported into the forms of vegetable derivative, phytopharmaceutical, in bulk, or industrialized product. The last trend that we would like to discuss is dietary supplements or nutraceuticals. In Brazil, they are called dietary supplements. Dietary supplements were regulated by Anvisa recently, and before the regulation, there was a confusion if the product were deemed as a drug or as a food. However, now there is a specific category of dietary supplements, and this confusion is over. But we should mention that according to Anvisa's definition, dietary supplements are intended for health people, and its purpose is to provide nutrients in addition to food. So the company cannot include in the label claims that suggest that the product is intended for treatment, prevention, or cure any disease. Otherwise, the product will be considered a drug. Some dietary supplements are subject to registration before Anvisa, such as those that have enzymes or probiotics, and the other supplements are exempt from registration. And that's it. This is my part.
Okay, thank you so much, Beatriz. And I would like to thank Veirano Advogados team here in the name of Renata, Fialho, Vanessa, Felício, and Beatriz Marconi for this great presentation. Also would like to thank the CCBC team for putting this event for organizing us to make this event. And most important, thank the attendees who came and spent this hour with us. I hope it was informative. And please feel free to send your questions either on the chat or by email, and those questions will be addressed. With that, I would like to thank you all, and I hope you like the event. Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Ricardo, agora a gente sai?
Eu vou perguntar aqui no WhatsApp